This is J. Martin Kohe, author of Your Greatest Power, speaking to you on that very important subject, how to overcome discouragement. You will hear 10 very vital factors in dealing with discouragement. Everyone at some time or other becomes discouraged. The greatest names in history have found themselves discouraged from time to time. In fact, Professor James, who was one of America's greatest psychologists, was so discouraged at one time that he threatened to end it all. Therefore, it is a good idea to say to yourself that everyone gets discouraged from time to time. So the real problem is not that we get discouraged, but that we know how to deal with discouragement. Some time ago, there was a story told about the devil who was being punished. The court said to the devil, "Do you have anything to say before we pronounce judgment?" The devil said, "Yes. I know that you are going to take away all of my powers, but please, I beg of you, leave me with one. Leave me with the power of discouragement. I know then that I can defeat any man." Although this is just a story, it is easy to understand how important discouragement is. Therefore, let us now proceed to defeat this one factor which is a problem to every living person. The first and most discouraging factor in life is the answer to the problem, what are we living for? Some time ago I saw a television program in which this very question was asked. The man who asked the question was so depressed that he gave up his job and refused to work until he found out what we are here for. One day this man was walking down the street, stopped in front of a pet shop, and noticed in the window a small turnstile with a white mouse running around it. The man stopped to observe the action of the mouse. When the owner of the store came out and said, "That is the way we are," the man in the story went home. Now he was really discouraged. To think that man is an animal? But my dear friends, there is all the difference in the world between an animal and a person. The individual, first of all, has a mind. Because he has a mind, he is able to think. This the animal cannot do. Because man is able to think he has a future, the animal has no future. The reason, therefore, that we are here on this earth is to grow. You know how you'll feel when you see your bank book growing. You know how you'll feel when your bank book is not growing. However, there are so many ways to grow, not only financially, but mentally, spiritually, in being of service to your community, to your churches, and to your fellow men. Keep growing. Keep developing yourself, and life will be interesting, worthwhile, and will destroy discouragement in many, many directions. The second great discouragement in life is the fact that someone is constantly holding us back. We are constantly being reminded by friends and relatives to let well enough alone. The very common expression is, be yourself. How many times in the years gone by have you been told to be yourself? Almost every time you want to do something, the least bit out of the ordinary, or almost every time you desire to have something greater or bigger than it appears you can handle, immediately someone is quick to cry, "Oh, be yourself." Before long, this being yourself becomes a discouraging problem. Fear sets in. Worry takes over the mentality of the individual. Discouragement follows, and the individual becomes a defeated personality. We suggest that at all times make up your mind to be your better self. Always ask the question, am I being my better self? If you will continue to remind yourself to follow the guide of your being your better self, you will find things begin to come your way. You will find yourself growing stronger, more capable. You will find yourself undertaking many projects which you have hesitated about before. Instead of being discouraged, you will find yourself with a new wave of courage. You will find yourself with more confidence, with a greater ambition than ever before to accomplish that in life which means so much to you. Whenever you look in the mirror, keep reminding yourself that you want to be your better self. Keep telling yourself that it is important. Do it every day. Remind yourself constantly of the importance of being your better self. The third factor in dealing with discouragement is that of fear. So many people are filled with fear. Some have become so fearful that their entire life seems to be surrounded by the cloud of being afraid. It was Franklin Delano Roosevelt who said, "The only thing that we have to be afraid of is fear itself." What causes fear? Did you ever ask yourself? Robinson, in his book The Mind in the Making, tells us that fear is caused by ignorance and uncertainty. Simplified and breaking these words down, what do we have? Ignorance simply means not knowing. Uncertainty simply means not being sure. In other words, fear means not knowing and not being sure. Therefore, it is important to say to yourself, not that I am afraid, but there is something that I do not know and something that I am not sure of. It is perfectly possible in almost every situation to find out what there is that you do not know and are not sure of. Through books, through the use of libraries, through professional advice, you can eliminate the problem of not knowing and not being sure. Once you begin to deal with fear by this method you have just heard, you will no longer worry about this fear, and in its place will be the right kind of thinking to eliminate fear. How can we be so sure that we can eliminate fear? Many years ago they tried to find out how many or what fears a child is born with. After experimenting with 500 babies, testing the babies in every conceivable fashion, they found out that we are born with only two natural fears: the fear of falling and the fear of a loud sound. They tried to scare these babies in every conceivable fashion, but the babies would respond in no way whatsoever except in the fear of falling and the fear of a loud sound. It is a definite fact that man is born with these two fears, and that is all. All other fears are man-made. If we made these fears, man can, through the same process of thinking, eliminate these fears. It is important, therefore, at all times to remind yourself of these two natural fears and stop making more fears for yourself. Once you do this, you will become less discouraged and more confident. The fourth discouraging factor in all of our lives is one that has slipped by us and succeeded in making our lives very miserable. This is the element of trying. You try to think of someone's name as familiar as your own, and the more you try to think of it, the more it gets away from you. The more you try to fall asleep at night, the more you stay awake. The more you try not to worry, the more you worry. This problem becomes most discouraging, and most people do not know what to do about it. If the trying principle would work, everybody in the United States would be rich, successful, and happy, because almost everybody in the United States is trying to be successful, rich, and happy. But it hasn't worked. After you have listened to this record once, take a piece of paper, put 3 numbers on it right underneath each other. Sign your name under 1 as you always do. Then sign under number 2 the way you always do. You will notice that both signatures are enough alike so that they were placed on 2 different checks, they would be accepted. Now, next to number 3, try very hard to sign your name. Make an effort to copy it just the way number 2 is. Make every single little letter exactly the same and write very slowly. You will then notice that signature number 3 would not pass for your signature. In other words, you cannot even sign your own name when you try too hard. It's the trying to sing that causes so much poor singing. It's the trying to talk that causes so much poor speaking. It's the trying to succeed that causes so many failures. Unfortunately, trying is not the answer. Then naturally you say, Mr. Kohe, what is the answer? The answer, my dear friends, is the RMA. The RMA will give you the success you want. It's the RMA that will help you accomplish the things that you want in life. What is the RMA? It means the right mental attitude. If you will have the right mental attitude in your work, you will find yourself succeeding in your work. If you will have the right mental attitude about money, you will find yourself attracting money. You know the old saying, money goes to money. Why? Because the man who is thinking right about money attracts money to himself. But the person who says he will never have any money, that he is one of God's blessed poor, that money is evil, this man will never attract money to himself. In fact, nothing in the world will help him attract money to himself unless he gets the right mental attitude. The starting point of success in any undertaking is the right mental attitude. As we go through life, we must constantly be aware of a very important factor. I am sure as long as we live in this great country, we will have everything we need. What does a person need? 3 meals a day, a place to sleep, clothes on his back, and a quarter in his pocket. We may not have everything we want, but that is also good, because once we have everything we want, we have no further desire to live. But most of our unhappiness and dissatisfaction in living comes from not having everything we want. If we will remind ourselves daily that we do have everything we need, then we can relax and go on getting the things we want. But if we constantly aggravate ourselves because we are not getting the things we want, then life really becomes discouraging. We must remind ourselves constantly, many times a day, that we have everything we need. How does one achieve this right mental attitude? First, by changing his thinking. Second, by reading books that will help him think effectively, through courses of training that are offered, by listening to this record over and over again until he gets the feel that things are beginning to come his way. The fifth discouraging factor in one's life comes about when one is unable to grasp things easily and as quickly as other people. The first conclusion that a person comes to under these circumstances is he feels that somewhere along the line he does not have the brains. This is a common problem. It happened to me. When I was a boy in school, I had a lot of trouble. My grades were very ordinary, and had not my oldest brother stood over my head with a baseball bat, I probably never would have finished the second grade of high school. Fortunately for me, I came across the following remarkable story. For many years, doctors have tried to find out if there's a difference in people's brains. During the time of Napoleon, a group of doctors went to Talleyrand, who was one of the smartest men living in France. They said to him, "Talleyrand, we want you to do us a favor." "What is it?" he asked. These doctors said, "We would like to have your brain, of course, after your life is over, so that we may test and examine it and find out what there is about your brain that makes you so superior. If we can find out, we can change the mentality of the world." Talleyrand then sat down and wrote a letter, giving these doctors permission to take the brain out of his head after his life was over. Some years later, Talleyrand died. The doctors took the brain out of his head, brought it into the laboratory, and began to experiment with it. When the day's work was over, they placed the brain on a slab in the laboratory. It so happened that in this very same laboratory there was a student doctor who was also working with brains. The brain that he was working with happened to be that of a laborer. As he finished his day's work, he saw the one brain on the slab and decided that was the place to put them. So he put the brain of the laborer right next to the brain of the brilliant-minded man. When the senior doctors came the next day to continue their experiments, they saw these two brains and couldn't tell which was which. Yes, my friends, you have all the brains you will ever need. You can go just as far as you like with no one to hold you back but yourself. The sixth discouraging problem in life is the problem of criticism. From the time we are small until the time we go to our graves, we are subject to criticism. If one is unable to take criticism, his life will be a problem throughout the years. But if one is able to take criticism, then life could be much more enjoyable, much more interesting, and much less discouraging. Many years ago, there was an Italian newsboy selling newspapers on the streets of Chicago. One day he approached an elder lady and said, "Madam, would you buy a paper from me?" She turned around and said, "I wouldn't buy a paper from you, you dirty little wop." The little fellow didn't sell many more papers that day. He went home that night and cried himself to sleep. The next morning when he awoke, he said to himself, "Maybe that woman was right. Maybe I haven't kept myself as clean as I should." So that morning he cleaned himself up from toe to head. He made up his mind that he was going to cut out the slang and stop the swearing. He noted to his surprise that he actually sold more papers. It wasn't long before he saved a little money and opened up a regular newsstand. The store was immaculate. His business grew and prospered, and before long he opened up a regular business. This store was just as clean as it could possibly be. He went on from one success to another until he became the owner of one of the big department stores in the city of Chicago. You will find someday that the newspaper writers and reporters will come to you, and they will want to know why you have succeeded if you achieve any degree of greatness. So they went to this very successful Italian merchant, and they asked him about his life. They said to him, Is there anything in your life that you might say was responsible for your success? He repeated the little story that you have just heard. He said, that woman taught me the value of cleanliness. In other words, we should not jump to conclusions when someone criticizes us. We should look for the lesson in the criticism. Once you find the lesson in the criticism, you will be grateful that the person criticizing you took the time to show you a better way of life. In other words, criticism does not come into your life to make you weaker, but to make you stronger. Another very important principle in the subject of criticism is something which very, very few people realize. As you probably remember when from your school days you studied about the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is a hot body of water that runs along the coast of Florida and up and around England. If it were not for this hot body of water, people would not be able to live in England, and Florida would not be so inviting. The Gulf Stream, without anyone paying any attention to it, runs its course. Likewise, there is a Gulf Stream running through your life and my life of perfection. It seems that everyone is seeking perfection. Consequently, the wife criticizes the husband because she wants him to be perfect. The husband criticizes the wife because he wants her to be perfect. The parent criticizes the child because he wants the child to be perfect. The child criticizes the parents because he wants the parents to be perfect. The teacher criticizes the student because he wants the student to be perfect. The student criticizes the teacher because he wants the teacher to be perfect. The boss criticizes the worker because he wants the worker to be perfect. And the worker criticizes the boss because he wants the boss to be perfect. The minister criticizes the congregation because he wants them to be perfect. And the congregation criticizes the minister because they want him to be perfect. Everybody seems to be criticizing everybody else. You wonder why life sometimes is so difficult. Don't ask your boss, your wife, your child to be perfect. If they are reasonably perfect, you are a very fortunate person. Don't even ask yourself to be perfect. If you are reasonably perfect, you should be quite happy with yourself. This constant demanding of perfection from ourselves and others is one of the greatest discouraging factors in life. It's quite all right to ask for a perfect typewriter or automobile or something of a mechanical nature, but when you ask it of a human being, you are making an unreasonable demand. Save yourself much trouble and great discouragement in the years to come. Simply ask yourself this question: am I criticizing simply because I want perfection? If so, be more reasonable. When someone criticizes you, ask the question, is he doing it because he wants me to be perfect? Then discount it. It's quite all right to seek perfection, but in dealing with yourself and others, make sure that you are reasonable. The seventh fear is the greatest of all destructive forces in the discussion of discouragement, and that of being too serious. Life is a serious business, but life can be made enjoyable and very much worthwhile. But when one takes life too seriously, then there is no room for pleasure or enjoyment for real living. Because we are going through life only once, although some authorities seem to feel we may go through it again, I for one feel that if we do go through it again, we won't know about it. Let us make this one time that we are going through life really worthwhile. In order to do that, we must learn how to laugh. We must learn to see the funny side of life. We must train ourselves more than anything else to throw off the seriousness that seems constantly to disturb our living. Unless we accomplish this task, we will look older and feel much older than our actual years. It was Lincoln who said, "A man is just about as happy as he makes up his mind to be." Contrary to general belief, we do not find happiness, we earn it. We earn it by constantly watching our thinking. One man who has achieved much throughout his life is Winston Churchill. When he was asked the question, "How do you keep yourself calm with all that you have to do?" he replied, "I think of only one thing at a time." That is the monumental key to the right mental attitude. If you realize that you can think of only one thing at a time, then by thinking of something pleasant, you keep yourself pleasant. By thinking of something cheerful, you keep yourself cheerful. By thinking of something unhappy, you make yourself unhappy. And if you think of something discouraging, of course, you will find yourself discouraged. Does this sound too simple? Of course it does. But it works. And you will find so many of these suggestions and ideas that we are presenting to you will work if you work them. Wherever possible, never take yourself or anyone else too seriously. This is one of the great destroyers of mankind and of our thinking. Be serious, but not too serious. Learn to laugh. You'll find that it will come easier with practice. It seems no matter what you do or how you do it, you cannot satisfy everybody. This is the 8th principle of dealing with discouragement. There is one way, however, that the great problem of human relations can be satisfactorily taken care of. In this great country, the Democrats and the Republicans differ strongly. We have religions of all sorts and kinds. We have so many differences of opinion, and yet we have a semblance of order, which is something to be proud of. Please stop thinking that it is wrong to disagree with others. If Columbus had not disagreed with the rest of the world when he did, we would not have had America when we did. If Edison had not disagreed with the rest of the world when he did, we wouldn't have had electric lights when we had them. There is nothing wrong with disagreement. But we must always bear in mind what a wise old sage said many years ago. If we must disagree, let us disagree without being disagreeable. Oh, if we could only learn this one great principle of life, to disagree without being disagreeable, we could avoid most of the very unhappy experiences that we have in dealing with people. This is especially true as people put on years. Too many people grow old, and with the growing old grow more disagreeable. If we could only learn to grow in sweetness, in friendliness, in helpfulness, the passing years would not be so difficult. When we think of sweetness, we always associate it with childhood, because we see so little of it in people of advanced years. If people would only learn to age instead of growing old, they could retain the sweetness of life and would not become so discouraged as they add years to their lives. A person should make up his mind to enjoy the 50s, 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. He can, if he will train himself. He can train himself to enjoy the later years in life as much as he did when he was much younger. A person in his 50s and the 60s now has lived long enough to be able to think so much better than a child of 12 or 14. It is important that we watch ourselves carefully so that we disagree without being disagreeable. When we can do that, we will never be alone. People will want us around. Children will have much greater respect for us, and more than anything else, we will have greater respect for ourselves. The 9th factor in dealing with discouragement is giving up too soon. Too many people allow themselves to become discouraged and then give up just before it is time to see success come their way. It was Albert Hubbard who said, many times there is just a line between success and failure. Too many people go right up to that line and then drop away. Had they kept right on going, they would have reached the other side, the success side. Remember the story of the man who ended his life by taking gas because some money that was coming to him did not come when it was supposed to? Thinking that the money was not forthcoming, he ended his life. The very next day, the check came in. But the classic story of quitting too soon is a story that Napoleon Hill tells in his famous book, Think and Grow Rich. Darby went out west and discovered a gold mine. He worked the mine with pick and shovel for several months, then came to the conclusion that this was not the right way to go about it. So he covered up the mine after staking his claim, went back to his home in the east, and there he talked to his friends and relatives and neighbors. He told them about the gold mine, explaining that if he had mining machinery, he and they would all make plenty of money. They agreed. They put up the money for the machinery. The machinery was bought and sent to the spot of the mine. The machinery was started, and just as Darby expected, there was plenty of gold. He started to pay off the debts on the land and on the machinery. He was just about ready to start to save some money for himself when the mine ran dry. Well, Darby thought, there is no sense in staying here anymore. So he called in a junk man, sold the machinery for junk, and threw the deed of the mine in with it. But it so happened that this junk man was no fool, and he called in a mining engineer. The engineer was to examine the mine and make out his report to the junk man. The junk man told the engineer that if the mine was worthless, he would break up the machinery and sell them for junk. But he wanted to be sure. The engineer went down into the mine, made a thorough search of the mine, and made out his report to the junk man. And what do you suppose he found? The report said that all the junk man had to do was find the secondary vein of gold, and he would find his gold mine if he would dig 3 feet deeper. The junk man started the machinery, and sure enough, 3 feet deeper, they found the secondary vein of gold, and the junk man became the millionaire. In the meantime, Darby had returned to his home in the East, and when he heard what happened to his gold mine, he almost lost his own mind. After a year, however, Darby recovered from this awful shock and went into another business. Every time he felt like quitting, he said to himself, "Wait a minute, Darby, wait a minute. You may be only 3 feet away from the very thing you want." With this awful, terrible experience behind him, Darby became a very wealthy man in another field of work. Remember, next time you want to quit anything, be very sure that you are not 3 feet away from the very thing you want. And now, finally, the 10th factor in dealing with discouragement is that of feeling that there is nothing that can be done about a given situation. Some years ago in the city of Chicago, a young newspaper reporter was called in by his boss and told that if he did not go out and bring in some stories that he would be fired from his job. The young man left the paper that night, fearful of losing his job, and proceeded to get himself drunk. He got so drunk that he wound up lying on the curb, dead drunk. As he lay there, he noticed the manhole of a sewer being raised, and coming out of the sewer were 3 people. One was dressed like a prince, one was dressed like a king, and one was dressed like a princess. When he saw all this, he thought surely he was having hallucinations. He picked himself up and finally wiggled his way home. The next morning he went downstairs and bought a morning paper. In screaming headlines he read, "The Big Chicago Theater Fire." These 3 people were not hallucinations. They were real people. What happened was that a fire broke out in the theater. These 3 people were downstairs in the basement. When they heard there was a fire in the theater proper, they opened the door and noticed that it led into the sewer. They continued in the sewer until they saw a manhole, then came up to the street through the manhole. I am sure that you see the point of this story. Just as those 3 people found a way out of that theater fire, so you will find there is always a way out of your trouble. If you keep yourself calm, you will find the right way out. If you let yourself get upset and excited, you will find the wrong way out. Yes, as awful and as destructive as discouragement can be, there is always a way out, a better way out, a better way of life, and a better mental attitude to make life worth the living. And now I would like to close with a classic story that tells so much to all of us. The story is told about 2 frogs. They were playing around a vat of cream. Before they realized what had happened, they both fell into the vat. One of the frogs, after swimming for a while, said, "This will never do. I'll never get out of this mess." So he sank to the bottom, and that was his end. The second frog said, "No. I'll keep swimming until I don't have an ounce of strength left." So he kept on swimming and swimming and swimming, and finally the vat of cream turned into a vat of butter. Then the second frog found himself sitting high and dry on top of the vat of butter. Yes, my friends, if we choose to keep on going, keep on swimming, keep on digging 3 feet deeper, we will win the struggle with discouragement. Once we do, life can be a grand and glorious venture.